Welcome back to Untaming Masculinity, the podcast where we tackle issues relevant to men in their journeys to reclaim their masculinity. I'm Dan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Brad. What's up, man?
Not much, man. Just hanging out. It's really early over here, so I had to regale you with an incoherent tale to get myself woken up prior to starting recording. No, things are good. Just it's going to get really, really cold, so we're finally going to feel like fall's hit us. I think it's going to be 40 degrees tomorrow, so I'm actually looking forward to it. What about you, man? What you been up to?
I've had an interesting week full of skunks and Germans and kitchen remodels and all kinds of fun stuff. No, I got
Skunks and
Germans. My company president in from Germany, so that's been a little bit of a busy time. And we went out as a management team for dinner, I guess Thursday night. And halfway home, I get a text from my wife, and all it says is, "Dog got a skunk. Backyard reeks. Washing dog now. Hurry home."
Oh my gosh.
Something along those lines. And I went, I'll be honest, man, the natural man in me started looking for hotels real quick because I was just like, I'm done. I'm checking out. It's been a long day. I don't have the time for this. I don't have the energy. But went home, took care of it. So yeah, my house and my I could smell it as I turned into my neighborhood.
And you're like, that's my house. This is great.
That's my house. That's my dog. Yeah. So I think the smell has pretty much dissipated at this point. It's about 3 days later, and the dog is not as interested in the kill area anymore. So that's good.
So did you guys take care of de-stinkifying your dog yourself, or did you throw it in the back of your truck and drive it to the vet?
Well,
/ dog wash.
This is where I wish I'd actually been home because my wife brought her into the house and bathed her in the bathroom, in the bathtub.
Oh no!
And that stink just tracked through the house. So I think that's part of the reason why the stink stayed around as long as it did, because of just them walking through the house. Whereas I would have been like, no, let's take her outside and wash her there.
Dude, that's brutal.
Yeah, it was not a fun experience, but it happens when you have dogs, right?
Yeah, man.
The big problem is I don't live in like a wooded area where I can kind of go out in the woods and dig a hole and bury the thing. It's just sitting in a trash bag on the side of my house until trash pickup next week.
Your dog.
Because I got all my hunting stuff in the back of my truck. I'm not going to stinkify all that stuff.
Oh yeah, you can't do that. That's brutal, man. Well, good luck. this bag just sitting on the side of your house.
Oh man. So today's episode, I wanted to talk about something that actually happened yesterday at work, and it's actually not work related. But so this week I tested. I've got a fitness coach, and he had me testing my 1 rep maxes for squat, bench, dead. And I got through all my workouts and got my 1 rep maxes, and lo and behold, I am still in the 1,000-pound club. Which, is not any great achievement, but at 43 and not having trained strength and coming off a rotator cuff surgery a couple years ago, I am actually pretty happy with. I even set a lifetime PR on squat. So it was a good week for me personally. And my boss is a big meathead. So I happened to mention to him what was going on. We always talk about workouts and stuff. And I told him, I said, hey, I'm definitely in the 1,000-pound club. I tested, here's my numbers. And he looks at me and he goes, "You going to get a t-shirt?" So for those of you who don't know, Westside Barbell, the, Louis Simmons place, they sell shirts with all the different 1,000-pound, 1,500-pound, whatever it is, the clubs. And I said, no, I said, listen, 1,000-pound club, high school kids do that. It's not a big deal. And he kind of shook his head and he looked me right in the eye and he goes, yeah, high school kids do it. He goes, but how many 43-year-old guys do it? And it kind of took me back. Now, am I going to get the shirt? Absolutely not. But it made me think about the concept of, are we celebrating the little wins along the way? We're all on these self-improvement paths. If you're listening to this podcast, it means that you're trying to be a better man. It means that you're trying to reclaim your masculinity. It means that you're trying to improve yourself. And along the way, we hit milestones. Are we so fascinated with the goals at the end that we don't enjoy the wins along the way? The whole situation with my boss and the t-shirt, as silly and as trivial as it was, and as trivial as lifting 1,000 pounds total is in life, it did make me realize, okay, I'm on a fitness journey of sorts. I've hit a milestone of sorts. Am I celebrating that, or am I just checking the box and moving forward? So the question to you, Brad, to start off is, how do you handle these situations? Do you celebrate the victories, or do you just check the box and move on to the ultimate goal at the end?
So when you were sharing that story, the one thing that really stuck out to me is the fact that you hit this benchmark, and you tell us something you were pumped up about, but you were immediately dismissive of it.
Yep.
Right? I'm the same way. If there's something that I'm making progress in, I've gotten a whole lot better at being able to recognize that this is something good that I've accomplished. But then the next thought oftentimes comes to dismissivism. Dismissivism isn't a word, but I'm dismissive of it. And then I'm like, okay, what's next? What's going to get me to that next check mark that I can then therefore really celebrate? Here's the kicker though. I look at various things in my life that I've been able to accomplish. And, fitness comes to mind, much like it does in a lot of our conversations, of when I was really getting after it and kicking ass in my fitness journey and I was completely dialed in. I went from, when I started, about 255 or 260 when I first took it seriously. And at my apex at one point last year, I got down to 190. And that's a little too light, but I look at myself in the mirror and I was pretty obviously looking pretty ripped. And I still remember thinking, I don't have a six pack yet. I still have there's a little bit of ring around my belly. I'm not there yet. So I wasn't necessarily able to fully enjoy and celebrate that victory the way that I needed to. Much the same thing can be said about a career. I went pretty quickly from starting a new role to going into a tech lead role and to going to management. And my boss is already talking to me about his trajectory for me to be a senior manager. And it's awesome and it's exciting. And I've enjoyed that. But at the same time, I'm looking at that and saying, okay, my salary's gotten X. It's getting a lot better. I want it to be more. I'd like to be more, but I look at myself and I'm like, I just became a first-time manager at 38 years old. Like, am I really all that if it took me that long to get there? It's really easy for these thoughts of victories to be juxtaposed against, what's the word I'm looking for? Juxtaposed against this feeling for more or this downplaying of what you've accomplished for X, Y, and Z. So I'm kind of in the same boat as you, man. And the question becomes why, right? There's a fine line between consistently being driven, consistently following that carrot in front of you, and never being complacent, or that's not the word I'm looking for. There's a fine line between really following that carrot that's dangling in front of you and being satisfied with where you are, that you really have to navigate.
Yeah, I agree with that. Right? The whole conversation that we're going to have is centering around not becoming complacent, but still being able to enjoy that singular moment. But I want to back it up a touch, and you were hitting on some things about, excuse me, maybe why we don't celebrate that moment. And I wrote down humble versus embarrassed. Right? Are we not celebrating those moments, and we're not making a big deal about them because we are humble guys, or are we not celebrating those moments? And maybe there's a third or fourth reason, but these are the two that come to my mind. Are we not celebrating those moments because we're embarrassed to say I've achieved X? If I'm going to be completely open and honest, I think I'd lean more towards the latter, where I'm actually embarrassed to promote myself and to say, hey, listen, you know what? I've been working hard. I got to this point. Now, my wife and kids will say that's complete crap, because every day I come home from the gym and be like, I lifted blah, 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 blah. But they're my cheerleading squad, and they don't cheer me when they say that stuff. That they're the people I can confide in there. But life in general, we don't celebrate that stuff. We just say, yeah, I hit that milestone. I'm on to this. It's immediately brushed over. It's immediately, because for me, a part of it is I don't want the accolades, not because I don't want to feel good. I do feel good when people give me accolades, but I'm very embarrassed when the conversation centers around me as opposed to something else, and pushing off and saying, okay, yeah, but the journey is still there. The journey is still out. The goal is still far out. I need to keep working on that. So yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on that, the whole concept of humble versus embarrassed.
No, that's a very interesting concept. And one thing I will say is, I know that you and I really, we want to recognize ourselves as high achieving men, but it's very hard for me to look at myself and say, I'm a high achieving man. Right? Like I feel that I'm on this journey to become a high achieving man, but it's very hard for me to distinguish the fact that, yeah, I'm a high achiever. I've got a
Do you
lot
think
of my
you'll
stuff
ever?
put together.
Do you think you'll ever establish yourself in your mind as a high achieving man?
Probably not. I mean,
I don't think I will.
I don't think that I'm going to. I don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing either. As long as we
I
have the
think I'm
right
always
mindset.
on the road to
Yeah.
being. I'm closer and closer every step, but I
Yeah.
feel like it also is one of those journeys that is infinite. Like I'm never
Yeah.
gonna completely get to what I view as a high achieving man.
And I think that I believe that that's a healthy mindset, that I'm on this journey to become this. It keeps that carrot in front of you. It keeps you striving for something as long as you treat it in an appropriate and healthy way. But coming back to this concept is, I've been on a massively upward trajectory at work, for example. So at my company, I have a role in which I work in tech support. But at the same time, I also do a lot of project management for our company's bug and outage processes. So I work for a software company, stuff breaks, and I am, to the majority of my company, the face of bugs. So I have a lot of opportunities to interact with a lot of people globally. I talk with people in Germany. I talk with people in the UK. I talk with people in Australia. I talk to our leadership group. I have a lot of conversations. And as a result, I am one of the more well-known non-executives in my company. People know my name. People know who I am. People come to me for things. Sometimes people don't like me because I don't tell them things they want to hear. But one of the interesting things was, I was fairly recent. I've been in this role doing the bug management stuff for 2.5 years. I was recently promoted in July to being a team manager within tech support, so that I had some direct reports. And my boss wanted to make a show of the whole thing. He was really excited for this promotion. He was really excited to make it happen. And he bragged about me to everybody. He sent out company-wide emails. He mentioned this on various calls that we jumped on. And this was a huge moment for me in my growth professionally. And I was embarrassed the entire time. Every time I get on a call, I was like, "Hey, everybody, Brad, I have an announcement. He's been promoted." I'd want to like drop my head and avert my eyes, and I was a little embarrassed. And it comes back to your story of being embarrassed. Like, yeah, this was something cool. This is something I was proud of, but getting the accolades and having my cake and eating it too, it made me very embarrassed. It was embarrassing to say, yeah, I was recently promoted to be a manager. And I just think that that's a microcosm of how we view progress. It can be slightly embarrassing. It can be disquieting in a way. Like, there's something within us that wants us to not be in the spotlight for whatever reason, to not necessarily feel like we've got it all figured out. So I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, but certainly is something that I've thought
Yeah,
about a lot.
I want to dig into the embarrassment thing a little bit.
Yeah.
Something I was thinking about was, when do we get embarrassed? So I was talking about my wife and my kids. They're my cheerleaders, and I tell them all the accomplishments that I make, right? And I'm not embarrassed with them. I'm not embarrassed with, uh, even my boss, who's a lifter as well. Like with that kind of stuff. But I'm embarrassed in the gym if I'm working out and the guy next to me is lifting more than me, right? I'm embarrassed in those types of situations. I'm embarrassed in a similar situation like you're talking about with work, where I'll get on a call and somebody will be like, "Oh, Dan got promoted, or Dan's in this new role." And what I realized was, I get embarrassed when people who are further along in the journey recognize my accomplishment. Whereas where people who are not as far along on the journey recognize my accomplishment, I don't get as embarrassed. And
No.
it's a realization that I'm just having as we have this conversation. So I'm still trying to kind of process it. But do you have any ideas maybe why that might be? Like, do you have a similar situation, or do you get embarrassed from both ends of the spectrum?
The first thought that came to my head, and I'm sure that this might be something that you thought about as you were talking about it, is ego.
Mm-hmm.
We as men have an ego, and that's your ego. Oh, excuse me, that's your ego talking, because you're embarrassed when you look at somebody who you feel is further along the path. That's fitness, whatever that is. But yeah, it's one of those questions that I'm going to ask you why. But this is a question more for all men, is why do we feel when we look at somebody that's a high achiever that we don't measure up? There's something about embarrassment because we can't lift as much. This guy who's 5 years younger than me is so much more accomplished in his career. So when I have conversations with him, I feel a little out of place. Why does our ego do that to us? What do you think it is?
So my immediate thought is pity. We believe that the guy who's further along the journey than us is giving us accolades because of pity. Oh, look at that guy. He's almost where I'm at, right? So let's just cheer him on. When in reality, I'm going to keep going back to the gym just because it's fresh in my mind. But right, so I was deadlifting next to a guy yesterday, and I pulled. The numbers don't matter. I pulled a heavy lift. I really struggled, but I got it. He gives me a fist bump. He asked me, if it was a PR. We talked for a few minutes, right? He then proceeds to throw on 40 more pounds than I lifted and rep out like 2 reps relatively easy. And I was just like totally deflated. And I felt in a moment that it was almost like pity from him, because he's like, oh, look at that guy. He's lifting cute weight, right? But I put myself in his shoes. And if I'm the guy lifting 40 more pounds and I see a guy really struggle but get a lift next to me, I'm fist bumping him up. I'm happy for him because he achieved something. So it's all mental for me. And I'm sure there's a lot of guys like it. There's got to be, in that we're making these assumptions about what these guys are thinking or what these people are thinking. And for the most part, they're probably happy just to see you succeed. Who cares where you are in the spectrum of the journey? You're moving forward in your journey, right?
Yep.
This guy, I would bet a paycheck that this guy was truly happy to see me make that lift, just because we're 2 guys who lift weights and he saw me struggle but nail something, and he knew that I was making progress towards my journey. The same way I would be if I saw somebody, if the roles were reversed. Yeah. But in my mind, I blew it up as, he's just trying to show me up, or he's trying to, he's just whatever. All this bad bullshit that is just not necessary. Yeah. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I think that we just play these mind games, and we think people are pitying us when really they're really happy for us. I'm sure your boss was really happy when he announced that you got promoted.
Oh, he was.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Here's a guy in my organization who's worked hard. I've been able to promote him or get, he was able, let me take that back. He worked hard and earned a promotion, and I'm proud of that. That's my guy, and he's moving up in the world, and I'm happy for him. And you kind of hung your head and did the whole aversion thing, because that's what we do, because we're idiots. And it's completely mental on our part.
Yeah. One of the things that I can't remember who told me this, but when somebody comes up and congratulates you, it's very easy to be self-deprecating and just be like, "Yeah, well, okay, cool, thanks." I wish I could remember who this was. It might have been Ryan Mickler, maybe. But the conversation was essentially, when somebody congratulates you for something and you feel embarrassed or you feel like you want to be self-deprecating, look them in the eye and say thank you.
Yeah,
that's it. By simply sending that message like that allows you to stand up and be confident. And as you do that, that starts to tell yourself, you know what? I'm worthy of this. I deserve this. And that's really the next thing. When you were telling that story about the guy next to you in the gym, it brings back this concept of, we as men are always comparing ourselves to other men and their station in life. How do I measure up against this guy? How do I measure up against that guy? We can't help it. It happens. Period. Every man with whom I interact, I compare myself to in some way. And, much to your point, when it comes to, if you compare yourself to somebody who doesn't have it as put together as you, you feel pretty good. You're like, okay, I've got some stuff going on. But if there's somebody else who has it figured out and you compare yourself against them, that's when you feel embarrassed. That's when your ego gets in the way. That's when you feel ashamed for whatever reason. And you hear that you hear that old saying that comparison is the thief of joy. And here's the kicker. All right, I'm just going to say this. Dan sent me a little chat that said I'm biting my tongue not to mention dick measuring contest. That's what it is. We have dick measuring contests all the time as men. And we cannot get away from comparing ourselves to other people. It's an impossibility. However, we have to be able to compare ourselves and our stations in life in a respectful, healthy way, which we can really celebrate and champion our wins. And yeah, there's always going to be somebody who's awesome. There's always going to be a freak. There's always going to be somebody who becomes a CEO of a company at 25. There's always going to be the Gordon Ryans of the world. Comparing ourselves to them is simply going to end up being destructive in the end.
So I have a love-hate relationship with comparison.
Right.
Because in one aspect, it's a great thing, right? Comparison is, here's a guy that I don't want to use the word idolize because that's not the right word, but here's a guy that I admire his accomplishments. There's a guy that's kind of modeling what I want to achieve in life, right? Whether it's a CEO of a company, whether it's somebody in the fitness industry, whether it's a professional athlete, whether it's somebody who just fathers his children very well. There's a man who's portraying certain attributes that I want in my life.
Yeah.
So when you compare yourself to those guys, you can use comparison as a powerful tool to say, okay, here's the guy that's modeling the dynamic that I want. Where am I comparatively? Let's define the gap, and now I can define a plan to get from A to B.
Yeah.
The detriment of comparison comes in when you start all the mind games of, well, he's doing this and I'm only doing this, so I'm inferior. No, you're not inferior in the sense of your value as a person is less. Yes, you're inferior in terms of, just by the definition of the word, of your income or your fitness level or your fathering capabilities or whatever comparative thing you're talking about. But it just means that you have work to do to get to that point, right? So comparison to me is a great tool if you use it correctly. It's when you start the mind games of, my value as a man is defined by how close I am to that aspect.
Yeah.
Your value as a man is much more than that. Your value is to the people that are directly involved with you and your family, your friends, people who love you and you are there to support and provide for. The delta between you and what you're comparing yourself to is just the path that you need to take to get to where you want to go. It should be your guiding star. It shouldn't be your value setter.
Yeah. So the question therefore becomes, because I think you are spot on. You're right there. Comparison, if used well, you can use that as an aspirational tool. I believe that in a lot of ways in my life, I've made that transition to where I can look at somebody else and use that as a motivating factor for the most part. There's obviously some exceptions, but that was a process that I had to identify. Right? There's a journey that had to take place in my past. And I guess the question becomes, how does a guy transition from comparing himself to others and constantly feeling that he doesn't have things figured out to beginning to understand that comparison is a tool that, when used well, can allow you to aspire for more? Like, how does somebody start that? Like, how does that mindset shift happen? It's not just like a switch flips on one day. So I guess I'm going to ask you, because I feel like you've been having a lot of fire that you've been spitting today. How does a guy start? How does a guy begin to understand how to use healthy comparison and to start to really celebrate his victories and the things that he's doing well?
My first thought on that is that you have to establish your own self-worth. You have to establish the fact that I am at X point in my life, X point in my journey. There are people who are further along, and there are people who are behind me. And oh, by the way, this scale is on many different levels. So the people who are ahead of me financially may be behind me fitness-wise. The people who are ahead of me as fathers may be behind me in terms of their self-defense capability. Just picking random things here. Your self-worth is what you define it to be. And your self-worth is not tied into what the guys at either end of the spectrum are doing. And you have to have some real conversations with yourself to get over that. I'm giving you advice, and I need to sometimes take this own advice because I get caught up in it every once in a while. He's so far down the road, I'll never get there. Bullshit. You put the right amount of work in, you get the right plan, you'll get there. Just because he's there and you're not, who gives a shit? But it takes a constant self-talk of establishing the fact that I'm here. Here are the steps I need to get to there. And here are the milestones along the way that I'm not going to blow everything up when I get to them, but I am going to stop, smell the roses, celebrate that a little bit, and then I'm going to move on to the next one. This strength journey that I'm on, right? After that talk with my boss, I sat down and I had a moment where I was really proud of myself. The last time I touched weights like this was before my first rotator cuff surgery. And for those of you who don't know, I've had both my rotator cuffs done since like 2019, I think. So, I haven't touched weights like this in 3 years. And it's been a long, slow journey to kind of get back to that. I celebrated that a little bit. And now, today, now I go back to work. Now I've got my next goal, whatever that is. And the goals are yours. I don't need to talk about what mine are particularly here, but have your milestones. And don't just, the other thing is, don't just have the start and the finish, right? Establish some steps along the way where you can stop and be like, okay, we're rising. I hit this. This is an important step. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to enjoy this. If it's a really big thing in life, I'm going to take my family out to a nice dinner and really embrace it. You know what I'm saying? But to answer your question, guys need to understand that this is a self journey, and the guys that we see in life that are at different stages, they're on their own journeys. And just because you aspire to be that guy or this guy is further behind you, their self-worth and your self-worth are not at a minimum tied in with where they are and you are on all of our separate journeys.
You're right there. Something I thought about a lot is, while you were talking, was what's worked for me. And when it comes to looking at other individuals, there was a mindset shift that I undertook where I looked at other folks as inspiration. Oh, cool. I would like to aspire to have some of their characteristics. But I've learned to really get good, or at least proficient, or at least okay, I guess. Now I'm self-deprecating a little bit and bringing it down. I've learned to really compare myself against myself to measure my progress. It didn't happen overnight. I remember I have a buddy of mine, and he and I, whenever we used to have conversations, it was always like, look at this guy and how much he has it figured out. There are these dudes who are 30 years old and they live in $1 million houses. We had a mutual friend in college who was the good-looking guy who got every girl no matter what. Everything in his life seemed to get put together. He got into law school. Coming out of law school, he ended up landing a really posh, just sweet gig. And we would always have conversations about this guy. It's like, man, why can't either of us ever catch a break like that? And it was interesting. I talked to this same buddy of mine on Thursday night, so 2 days ago. And talking to him about life, I realized that those conversations don't happen anymore. We even recognize it because what we started to do is looking at our own journeys and how far we progressed and how far we've come. That's something that we need to do regularly. Look at the progress we've made. Like you said, sometimes we need to take a step back and celebrate those victories. Yeah. If I'm going to spend all of my time obsessed over how I compare on the jiu-jitsu mat to Gordon Ryan, or how I compare financially to any number of billionaires in the world, all I'm ever going to do is be miserable. But if I look at myself and say, okay, in jiu-jitsu 8 months ago, I couldn't tell you how in the world to execute a guillotine. If somebody got on my back, I'd start flailing and flipping around and freaking out. And now I know what to do. Now I know that if I go up against somebody who's brand new, I can do some stuff on it. Those skills have improved and progressed. If I look at myself in the gym as I'm lifting or as I'm looking at my, getting in shape, okay, look at Brad 2 years ago versus where Brad is now. I'm stronger. I'm more capable. My VO2 max is higher. My output's a lot better. By doing those things and comparing myself against myself, that journey has become that much better. Now, it is important to stop, take a breath, look around, and acknowledge and appreciate the progress you've made. But when you can start to compare yourself against your previous self, that's when all that work seems to pay off. Now, I look at myself financially. Yeah, I don't make $1 million a year. But at the same time, I know that my salary has increased by 75% in the last 4 years. And that's a testament to me and the work that I'm put on. The work that I've put in, rather. I'm on an upward trajectory in all these areas of my life and in all these aspects of my life simply because I've done the work. And most importantly, I've been able to recognize that in my marriage. So I guess I know I'm kind of talking a lot, but there's a story that I want to share that kind of measures this up. So my wife and I just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And I've talked about this on several previous podcasts and episodes. I thought my marriage was over for a long time due to stupid decisions that I made. I was dishonest. My wife could not trust me. I could not support her emotionally. Like, things were bad. Things were not good. And it was all my doing. However, I did the work. It was hard. There were ups, there were downs. There were some days I felt that I was still on a bad trajectory, but I just continued to work. And we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. We went to Playa del Carmen down in Mexico, stayed at a resort, ate a whole lot of food, and had an amazing time just spending time with each other. And I've told you this, Dan, and I've told a few other people this, but that was the best time I've had with my wife in years. I felt that we were in a place that we have not been in years and years and years. And it was one of those things where we were sitting there on the beach one night after we had dinner. Every night we would just go out on the beach, walk along the beach, just kind of sit down in a beach chair, just watch the moon, watch the stars, watch the waves come in. And it was in those moments where I was like, wow, I never thought this would have been possible 3 years ago. It wouldn't have been. That's the victory. Take a second. Compare yourself in where you are now against where you were previously. As long as you're moving upward, you'll see it. You'll feel it.
So that moment, or those moments walking down the beach, did those make you want to rest on your laurels, or did those make you want to work even harder at your marriage?
Made me want to do that much more. It made me ask, why couldn't I have gotten to this place? Why couldn't I have had these conversations? Why couldn't I have simply done small things like hold my wife's hand 3 years ago? So it just fired me up and made me want to be that much better as a man for her.
Yeah. And that's my point is, right, we have to get to the point where we celebrate the victories. You celebrated that 10-year anniversary. You celebrated the fact that you essentially saved your marriage, and use that as fodder to continue on our journey to even bigger and better things.
Yeah. Like, some of the coolest things that I see, coming back to the gym, that's the low-hanging fruit all the time, right? But there's a lot of powerful stories that come from fitness journeys, is when you have a friend who's really overweight. Like, I have a buddy, he's an awesome guy, but he's a big dude. I saw him recently, and he's like, yeah, I've been eating healthy. I've been walking every day. I've lost 30 pounds. And it was awesome that he put it out there. And I was like, dude, that's awesome. Keep it up. Like, that's incredible. How do you feel? It's like, I feel good. Yeah, remember that. Keep working. Don't forget how you feel right now. Because in that journey, yeah, if you weigh 350 pounds and you get down to 340, it's really easy to say, man, I've got too far to go. I can't do it. Yeah. But if you look at yourself and say, man, I lost 10 pounds. I feel good. Bottle that up. Channel that. If you will feel good when you make progress in some area of your life. At your job, when you get a raise, you're going to feel good. Bottle that shit up, because you're going to look back and remember that, and that can keep you going.
And just to be clear, when you say bottle that shit up, you don't mean emotionally. You mean remember that feeling.
Yes.
Remember that feeling. Remember that joy. Remember that pride.
Yeah.
And use it as fuel to keep moving forward.
Yeah. Thank you for
celebrate the moment.
Yes. Remember it. Keep tabs of that.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I think this is a great place to wrap it up. So, fellas, we appreciate you guys listening. As always, it's Brad and I's pleasure to come on and have these conversations with you. We would love if you guys hit us up on social media and let us know how you're working towards your journeys, how you celebrate your little wins or not so little wins, and in general, just talk. Keep in communication with us. Talk to us. We love reaching out to you guys and hearing about your journeys. So you can check us out on untamingmasculinity.com. We've got all of our show notes for this and all of our other episodes. And the only other thing that we ask is that you leave a rating and review in your podcast player. I say this every week, but those ratings and reviews are what helps us spread the word to other men and helps us get our message out. So please, please, please go in, leave us a rating and review, and help us spread the word. Other than that, Brad, thanks again, man. Great conversation. All you guys, thank you for listening. Make sure you come back next week. And until then, we'll leave you with just one question. What are you doing to untame your masculinity?